Hello. This week's Torah portion, Beshallach, begins with, quote, "And it came to pass, when Pharaoh let the people go, that God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was the closest route, because God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt." Unquote. Let me begin with 2 points. First, it says, Vayehi, and it came to pass. The Talmud tells us that this phrase always implies that a bad thing is about to happen. Quote, "We receive this tradition from the men of the Great Assembly. Anywhere the Torah says, Vayehi, and it came to pass, it indicates nothing but impending grief, as if the word were a contraction of the words Vai and He, meaning woe and mourning." Unquote. Why is it used here to introduce a sentence saying that the Israelites were freed from Egypt? Isn't it a happy occasion? Second, it says, Beshallach Paro et ha'am, when Pharaoh let the people go. Why does Pharaoh get the credit? Why doesn't it say, when God or Moses freed the people? Also, the phrase is translated variously as, when Pharaoh let the people go, dismissed the people, released the people, discharged the people, accompanied the people, or escorted the people. All these questions are answered by the same observation. Pharaoh accompanying us means we were still carrying our negative experience in Egypt along with us. We were still carrying Pharaoh, as it were. We left Egypt physically, but not emotionally. Egypt was still with us. We were not really free. We were afflicted with the slave mentality. Whence Vayehi, implying a bad thing follows. Whence Pharaoh is mentioned and not Moses. Whence God says, I'd better send them on a longer route to get them used to the idea of having left Egypt permanently. Let's back up. Why were the Israelites enslaved in the first place? It was not divine punishment. God tells Abraham in the book of Genesis, quote, "Know for certain that your offspring will be strangers in a strange land and will be enslaved and afflicted for 400 years." Unquote. It does not state a reason, and none is obvious. It's not punishment. So evidently, God thought slavery was necessary for his plan and led to some good. But how? There are many possible answers. First, slavery was necessary for our protection. Jacob's clan in Israel was an easy target for strong, marauding neighbors. But in Egypt, a superpower protected them, albeit to exploit them. Second, slavery allowed us to build up our numbers in safety, to build up our identity and community spirit. We were all in the same boat and followed the same customs. Third, slavery minimized contact with the outside world, which reduced the practice of idolatry and eliminated the possibility of intermarriage. Egyptians wouldn't marry slaves, and the children of rape would be raised by their mothers as Jews, away from their fathers. Fourth, slavery created a scenario that allowed God to show the Jews and the whole world who was in charge, as he did when he freed us. Fifth, the gratitude that we felt upon liberation and the slave mentality we had acquired made it easier for us to accept the Torah as God wanted us to. So slavery served God's plan up to the giving of the Torah. But why couldn't God have made slavery less brutal and more tolerable? Because then few Israelites would have wanted to leave. Even as it is, the Midrash tells us that 80% of the Israelites refused to go and died in the plague of darkness. The remaining 20% may have left, but they grumbled incessantly about going back, and some even staged an open revolt. Fear of change is normal and universal. People prefer the devil they know, in this case slavery, to the devil they don't know, in this case the uncertainty of the desert and a radically new way of life. Change is always hard, especially for older people, and leaders tend to be older. Yes, life in Egypt was supremely painful, but Egypt was also home. It was also familiar. In Egypt, they worked hard as slaves for people who beat them and despised them. but they had life, food, shelter, clothing, protection, regularity, predictability. They did not want to face problems they never had before. We see that God decides not to take the Israelites to the land of the Philistines, because the Torah says they might get scared by war and return to Egypt. Rather, he takes them by the Sea of Reeds, a circuitous route. Nevertheless, this is exactly what happens anyway. The Israelites do face the Egyptian army at the Sea of Reeds and do ask to return to Egypt. And they also have to face Amalek in battle. So why bother to avoid the shortcut through the land of the Philistines in the first place? Also, why should the Israelites fear war? After all, they are 600,000 men strong and they are armed. And they know they will have to fight their way into the promised land anyway. And why did they complain after the splitting of the sea? Didn't God just perform a whole bunch of miracles for them? All these questions have the same answer. Their slave mentality, which God is trying to break. The Israelites feared war in part because in their mind it is inconceivable for slaves to rise up against their masters. Rabbi Menachem Leibtag says that the whole point in our parasha, Beshallach, is to liberate the Israelites from the slave mentality. Fast forward to modern times. I was born and raised in that same Egypt and lived there until I was 18. I saw the Jewish community shrink around me from 100,000 to 1,000, and I was one of the last Jews to be forced out in late 1967. In retrospect, it was all to the good. The Jews from Egypt did better outside of Egypt than they could ever have done in Egypt, even under the best of conditions. But the uprooting was still excruciatingly painful to the heads of families, who continue to their dying day to wax nostalgic about their life in Egypt. They may have been harassed, persecuted, dispossessed, and finally forced out, but they glossed over all that and frequently said, well, at least they didn't kill us. As if not being quite as bad as the Nazis was a virtue that exonerated the Egyptians. All this is typical of the slave mentality. That's why God engineered the 40-year trek through the desert. He wanted all those who were adults at the time of the Exodus to die out, so that the new generation, one that has not known slavery and truly wanted to live in freedom with no misgivings, would take over and start the new country in the promised land with no regrets about life in Egypt, with no slave mentality. Shabbat Shalom.